Yeah.
Well,
They, some of them would, but they, you know, well,
Much better, right?
yeah. all right.
he said that when we need to. Yeah. Just waiting for you lot. Yeah.
You saw Sanchez here, Councilor Sanchez? Yeah, she saw him here.
Oh, you saw us. Oh, maybe she's in the restaurant. You just give me 1 more minute. Sure. Yeah. There. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Melanie Anthony. I'm the city councilwoman for Ward 2 and chair of the finance committee. I'm calling to order our regular meeting on Wednesday, May 17th, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Chairwoman Helen D'Antoni,
Present.
Vice Chairman Juan Pichardo,
Present.
Councilman James Taylor is absent, Councilor Sue Enderbois,
Present.
Councilor Miguel Sanchez is absent. We have 3 present, 2 absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. I would also like to recognize our senior assistant city solicitor, Kat Catarina. We have Julie Delanco, Claire Gerard, clerking tonight. Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to move to the agenda. May I have a motion to waive the reading of agenda items 1 through 4?
So moved.
Second. Motion made by Councilor Pichardo, seconded by Councilor Anderbaugh. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? I would also like to have a motion to continue, Joe Wilson Jr., Director of the Department of Art and Culture and Tourism. I believe he is, going to appear before us on May 25th. May I have a motion to continue?
Moved.
Second. Motion made by Councilor Pichardo, seconded by Councilor Anderbaugh. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. And so tonight, we have before us the Department of Human Relations, Department of Human Services, and the Department of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. So who would like to start the presentation?
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, good evening, and once again, we'll follow with your permission in the same format, and myself and Ms. Surveyor here reporting on the budget, and we have various department officials representing the departments that we've asked them here. They are here this evening. If we can all respond at the same time, it'll be.
Thank you so much. Would everyone stand? Whoever's testifying. Ready?
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I did.
Please state your name and your title.
Donald Spancini, Chief Financial Officer, City of Brown.
There is a very good.
Silas Chief Director of the
Rachel Newman Green, Acting Director of the Health and Human Services.
Kelsey Moore, Crystal Advisor of the Health and Community Office.
Sue Murphy of Senior Services Director.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you, Chief and Director. Before you start, I would just like to recognize, well, first of all, we have Councilor Sanchez who just joined us. But I would like to recognize our new Director of Policy and Resilience. Where is she? Sheila Germany, where we just like that. So welcome. Okay. All right, Chief and your.
So, Madam Chair and members of the committee, we will continue with the same format committee's been accustomed to. We will, Ms. Silveira, as finance director, will read into the record the budget narrative and summary, and I believe copies are available or have been distributed already as to your benefit as well as exhibit. And we have representatives of the department here this evening to discuss the budget. Or their.
Do you have any preference which department you'd like to meet first?
I really don't, so whichever way you would like to, I think we have them in order: human relations, human services, and the.
On human relations, I have a budget in the packet with a narrative provided by the administration detailing what that office does. It is currently, it's an office of one, it's a currently vacant position that is being recruited right now. I believe the commission met last week and made a recommendation for someone, but that person is not yet in place. So this budget has been level funded, consistent with prior years. There's no department director presently.
Okay. So level funded, so can I just talk about this? Well, maybe we could just talk about, I'm sorry, the director has, how long has that position been vacant?
It's been vacant a while, maybe 9 months.
And can you just, basically somebody and they just talk to them about what human relations does and give them an overview.
Sure. So, the Providence Human Relations Commission celebrates and elevates Providence diverse cultural communities, facilitates workshops and trainings to support civil rights, ensures discrimination complaints are investigated and adjudicated properly, advocates for policies that codify and protect civil rights of Providence residents, and supports the work of 2 boards and commissions.
And you're reading from the handout that we have for the 3 currently. Okay. I guess so this particular department, is this created according to our city charter?
I believe it's an order, it's an ordinance. It's created by ordinance.
Okay, so right now we have no leader. It's been vacant for 9 months.
It's been vacant for a while. I don't want to, I'm not exactly sure how long, but it's been vacant for.
I would say I'm a little bit. I would like that. I would so much like that because I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
Tonight. That's all. Thank you. Thank you, please. Thank you.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and title.
My name is Emily Ward Pearl. I'm the chief of staff for Mayor's Committee.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah.
What joining us?
I'm very nervous because I've seen what this camera does and the angle on it, because I watch you guys night after night, and so I'm very mindful of what I look like. I look at you guys all night long. So I can speak a little bit to this, both of my prior experience in the city and as going through the hiring process. And so the process of the position has been vacated since last fall. The person that was serving in the position moved on to take an ARPA position that handles our broadband work. So they're still with the city, but they took an internal opportunity. It was posted then. The commission met. I believe the commission didn't advance any of the candidates. They reviewed the resumes, but made no recommendation. Position was reposted under the new administration. The board just met last Thursday to make some recommendations to the mayor after interviewing all of the candidates that they had moved forward for consideration. That's what the office does. And the office, I think, has changed a little bit maybe since I left, but they organized several events for the commission board. A racial healing event that we had just done. The mayor's office supports them while they don't have an executive director. So if they need any help with procurement, if they need any help with anything, our deputy chief of staff, Matt Shoemate, has been helping them convene and helping them get room access, simple things like that, logistics, that stuff normally the executive director would do. If they receive a complaint, they send it to the state's Human Relations Commission. So the city made it pass an ordinance prior to the state's commission either being impaneled or staffed. And so most of the complaints are heard by the board and then sent to the state. In my time with the city, I don't recall any cases being heard by them, but they do receive complaints and send them on. And they meet on other things, on events. They were all existed prior to the creation of the Department of Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And so I imagine, like, moving forward, there'd be a lot more overlap between the executive director and the work that Dee does. But in the past, they kind of served as a way to support cultural events and things that happen in the city, in City Hall particularly.
I
With the board.
appreciate the testimony, and I guess that is where I'm heading, and I understand the important work that we have here from CLS later. On
Yeah.
the work,
Mhm.
but it seems to me that it seems to me a little bit overlapping. I'm not sure, it doesn't feel quite right that, we haven't filled this position. I'm concerned. I've heard is our commission actually functioning? Because I've heard a lot of complaints about lack of quorum and kind of, they have set state duties, but I'm just worried about whether they're actually functioning. And so that's why, I'm very eager to hear what you have to say about the future of this department, the future of the direction of the commission, and I'd also like to know a little bit about, so we're gonna pay the executive the salary of, is that what the salary is budgeted, just one salary and the salary line?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, and can you address the, is the commission functioning?
So I can't speak to personal experience. I haven't worked with them directly, but I do know they convened, they established their own subcommittee for hiring. They met individually with their subcommittee to kind of go over the resumes and discuss them internally and advance some candidates forward. And they have participated in all of the interviews, and they had no issue with quorum or participation during that time. I can't speak to anything pre-January, and we've only had one meeting with them prior to the hiring process.
Okay, and is there any discussion about trying to coordinate and align these departments or, deed and human relations? We're going to hear from human services, but I just would like to know if there's any talk about reorganizing or coordinating and aligning their work.
I think we've talked about better coordination between DEEB and this department. I don't think that human services necessarily overlaps entirely, but I think that there's a lot of overlap here. I know that both the commission and this position help support event-based work. I know that you're going to hear from Silas on the training work that he does, but Silas's time isn't necessarily spent around event logistics and things like that. They did a really great event at PPL earlier this year, and I know that took a lot of work. That was work that we did in the mayor's office to help support them, but I do think that they need some level of staffing. I also think that a staff person keeping them kind of on task and in order would help kind of advance the meeting agendas on their own rather than them setting them.
Okay, questions? Yes.
How many board members are?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can absolutely get that information. I don't believe there's any vacancies right now. In the network. 10 commissioners and 3 vacancies. Director Bavaria tells me.
This time's so long. 10 total.
Yeah.
Are they located in the same building as
Yes,
the same?
City Hall.
They're here,
Well, the staff person or the board member?
the staffers,
They would be located in City Hall.
they're
So the-
new, but they will always be here?
Yeah.
In this office.
they've been in different physical offices throughout the history of City Hall. That's just based upon my knowledge of where their office has been, but yeah, it's always been in City Hall.
Since things have evolved over time, with other organizations, have this been reviewed in a sense of, and obviously like history from the previous administration, in terms of having just one department within, whether it's a second director or deputy or a manager of human relations and so forth. Have there been any assessment to look at a more holistic department?
Sure, I don't think there's been any thoughts about adding additional staff to this department. I think it's more about how this department coordinates with other staff people. And so this position physically will be with the community relations folks, which is typically where they, at one point in time, where the all gender bathroom is, that was their office, but that is a bathroom now. And so they have moved upstairs to the second floor. And so physically, when in hiring, once they physically get here, they're going to live near community relations to better align the work that community relations does and that the Human Relations Commission is doing, particularly with event outreach, training outreach, or resource outreach. Sometimes they partner with other organizations, and they have a Facebook page, but they rely on the community relations team and partnerships the city has to get that information out.
I just got another follow-up. So the commission members, they are reimbursed for their costs, is that correct? I don't think they're paid, are they reimbursed? for
No.
Cost to them, or do they receive any compensation at all?
No, I don't know.
All right, and what is the expense line? Then on the human relation.
So we've level funded it, given that there's no director currently, kind of kept the funding consistent with prior year.
And so we don't know, I'd like to know what those are, what those expenses are.
I can't speak to pre-January, but I know that since January, any expenses have been related to the day of racial healing that they had for translation, interpretation, and the artists that performed there. So that's just the only example of an expense that I've seen since I've been in this position.
Okay.
Contractor services, is that for, what is that for? Okay, and then the other item is, food. Something about, you know,
And the events, sorry, your question was, I'm sorry, I was making.
So, on the line of, contractor services, is 14,
Yeah.
Yeah, and then food, is that for the board members or events?
I would imagine it's for the events. I can't speak to those directly, but I would imagine so. They've also done trainings in the past, and so I would have to look at the past year of expenses to see what they spent last year. It's likely paying for artists and people to do the trainings that they host.
Go ahead, Counselor Anderson.
More of a comment, I think also, like, if we read the packet, like, I think most of us went to another event they did earlier this year, the the Hall of Fame Award.
Yeah, they do.
So they also organized that.
Yes.
So like, there, so just to add that, that is what, I mean, at that event, so just pointing out that also.
You buy glass bowls for that event.
Yeah, like they've got their awards and
Yeah.
they had printed materials.
Yep. Thank you for noting that.
Hey, any other questions? Okay, thank you so much, I appreciate it. And I was going to recognize Councilor Peterson, who joined us this evening.
Oh, no.
Okay. Oh, I'm
Spirit.
No, it's what the very came here, so I'm so sorry. I wanted to recognize the speaker also. Thank you. Okay, I would like to ask to have this marked as exhibit number 21, and that is the human relations budget exhibit. Go back or whatever, moved by Councilor Angerville, seconded by Councilor Sanchez. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Thank you. Okay, that will be 21. Okay, on we go.
Next up, we have human services. So human services is not a revenue generating department. In their salary line, they have proposed a $513,070 budget, an increase of $2,108 over the 23 budget. The department has requested the following organizational changes. Fund a health literacy program manager at $59,538. That is 100% grant funded, so there's no general fund effect. Fund a housing resource coordinator for $67,538. And fund a program coordinator for $52,199. That is 100% grant funded and has no general fund effect. The department has offset this cost by increasing grant funding for positions in this office by $177,154. And the salaries also includes the local 1033 contractual cost of living adjustment of 2.75% and step increases. Benefits in fiscal 24 are proposed at $224,901, an increase of $26,722 over the fiscal 23 budget. Moving on to services, total services in fiscal 24 are proposed at $1,489,300 $98, a decrease of $87,207 from the 23 budget. The department has savings in contractual and program expense. Total supplies in fiscal 24 are proposed at $7,200, an increase of $1,300 over the fiscal year 23 budget. There's no capital budget for this department. And I'd like to turn it over to Director Rachel Newman Green to give you an overview of the department and answer any questions.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. So I think some of you are familiar with the work of my office, but the Healthy Communities Office functions as the primary health promotion and health policy office in the city. We take an approach called health in all policies, and I like to summarize that as we believe everything is health and health is everything. So when we think about all the functions of the city, they all impact the health of the city's residents, and likewise the health of the city's residents impact the well-being of the city overall. So we have a broad array of activities and services that we do. The origins of our department were in substance use prevention, but over the years, the understanding of those issues has evolved, and now we take a much broader behavioral health approach. And I think that with the broadening of that approach has also become broadened opportunities for funding. So we've been able to access a large number of federal grants for a variety of behavioral health, substance use issues and other things. We also have a standing line of work specifically on food access. So we do a lot of work to support food security and other food issues throughout the city. Our staff has grown substantially, but it has grown with the additions of the grants that we've been fortunate enough to bring in. And at this point is a really great, well-rounded staff of folks that have a lot of experience in behavioral health, in substance use, in deep experience in the communities of Providence. And I think some of you, if I'm not mistaken, Councilman Richardo and I was at one of our events recently where we were doing some, our staff was doing some mindfulness exercises. We've done a good number of health needs assessments in the past years. We believe that our work is really grounded in doing real assessments of the community's needs. And one of the emerging needs that I think everybody's aware of really is around mental health. And I think that's not just the crisis that we might see played out on the street, but I think a lot of the impacts of the pandemic and other things are really playing out as mental health crises within families and throughout the community. So that's a good amount of, we're increasing opportunities to focus on mental health. We also are currently conducting a food security and food emergency response plan for the city. The purpose of that is to make sure that we are better prepared to respond to an emergency when one comes around. A lot of us think we're still in one. And then the other piece of it is overall to figure out how to make food security, a stronger baseline of food security throughout the city overall. Those are, I would say, the two main lines of work, and we have a lot of other branches of work that touch other areas of well-being in the city's families.
Questions? Committee members? Yes, Councilor Randall.
Thank you for being here, Director. It's good to see you. Always fan of your work. I had a question, two questions on the budget itself. There's a line for land and building rentals that goes up about $1,000. What land and building are we renting?
Previously, we had not included rental of space that our office uses. So we are currently located at 444. And I think all of the folks who use that pay a small amount of the expense for using our, so that's just our own office space.
Okay, that's right. And then the other one was for contractual services, like 1.2 million. What's involved in the various like contractual?
Yeah, let me pull that out. So that is a broad array of services that support health throughout the city. A lot of them that I mentioned are around behavioral health, substance use. A big one is in the past year, we stood up the city's behavioral health crisis response. So that's kind of a big ticket item. But what we do with that is twofold. One, we contract the Providence Center that provides clinicians that do ride-alongs with our EMTs. And then we also support overtime. I think that's not under contractual, that's maybe under the corporate expense. We think, not sure. Support the overtime of the EMT and firefighters. So those are big ticket items. And other items that have to do with specifically the that response. We have other items. We have a contract for a program called SOAR, which is a homeless support. It's outreach to make sure that folks who are homeless or who are facing the possibility of homeless are able to be connected to the appropriate SSI and SSDI programs. So we contract the Rhode Island Coalition to Prevent Homelessness, Commission Against Homelessness, Rich, for that. Other big ticket items. Safe Stations is a program where we provide clinicians, or rather peer counselors, so that if somebody who's facing addiction or any kind of substance use crisis, 24 hours a day, find themselves ready to receive help, they can go to any city fire station and a peer counselor can come meet them there. So that's a contract with Anchor Recovery Services to be on call to do that. I think those are the biggest ticket items. The other ones, we have some standing funds specifically to support Providence school health needs. A number of years ago, or yes, yeah, 2 years ago, we conducted a school health needs assessment that identified opportunities and needs specifically within the Providence Public School student body. And so we make funds available to address those in partnership with the district or other folks who are helping students. I'm happy to answer questions about any of the smaller ticket items, but I think those are the big ones.
Sure, please. And then I also want to say, you do an amazing job of getting grant funding. Do you guys have your own grant writer, or is this you? Like,
We have, like I said, we have a really great staff. We do not have a grant writer. We have, I think, just a really strong track record. We're able to build on past successes. We have done those grants mostly in-house. We have one big one that's in here, which is a $2 million grant, actually is a partnership with Rhode Island Public Health Institute, and they wrote that. I know that's $2 million. They wrote that.
Awesome, thank you. I was also going to ask you the same, because it's really incredible how many of your positions also grant funded in some regard, and you do a tremendous amount of work. It's quite impressive and we're very thankful. So, and also I just wanted to talk about your vacancies. So you're very happy with hiring or trying to hire, well, it looks like a director.
Yes, so I'm currently acting director. Previously was the deputy director, so the director position is technically open. And the other position that we're adding is the housing. I'm going to make sure I have the title exactly right. It's the housing resource coordinator. So the purpose of that position is, I think everybody's aware of the crisis that we're all experiencing around homelessness. And I think we recognize that there's been a gap in the city in terms of a coordinated response to that. So that person would be in charge of being the interface with service agencies that interact with that issue, but also would be in charge of coordinating and overseeing the various contracts that the city has with service agencies, and I think is actually going to fill a very much needed gap, both in the city overall and in our office, because the other piece of it is, as we've all been working very hard to respond to the ongoing housing crisis, but also specific issues around the armory and that sort of thing, there really hasn't been the person whose job that is, and that's just really important.
And can you just go a little an example of the contract, if you don't, the contracts they would be coordinated, and do we have a list of those contracts?
So right now, I know that we have, well, there's the one that I referenced that is the one around SSI and SSDI benefits for homeless or people facing the possibility of homelessness. There is, we have a contract. Oh, thank you so much. Perfect. Let's see. Specifically, housing related ones, there's a rapid rehousing and shelter, fund that is, through actually our, planning and development office, I believe, right?
Yeah, I can swear in to talk about.
Yeah, please.
Happy for 2
Yes,
minutes.
please,
Okay.
join us. Because you're going to keep us back.
Okay, cool.
Make yourself comfortable.
I was here particularly to speak to this. It was something that within our first few weeks, we realized really lived within Rachel's department and had no real home, but stretched across departments throughout the city. So this position will interact with, and her department interacts with a variety of contracts that are really the whole scope of public health, because we know that we're approaching the housing crisis as a public health crisis. And we know that if someone's experiencing homelessness, they may have other underlying issues. And so we're trying to activate all of the contractors that we have. And so there is a rapid rehousing contract that lives within the planning department. Rachel has some social support services that live within her department. The fire department has a contract with the Providence Center. The police department has a contract with Family Services of Rhode Island. And so what we've been doing as a team is coordinating those services. And so Rachel can say, I'm going to activate I'm going to ask Enos House if they can go out, particularly given the capacity that our providers have right now. We are sending in our fire and our EMS, our paired response unit far more often when there's a capacity gap in our providers. And that requires some kind of touch point and some kind of person. Right now, that all is within my head, and we've been doing daily calls to really make sure that we're all aligned and that we're responding in a unified way. But it's our hope that this person would oversee that and also pursue additional grant funding that we may not have the capacity for right now. I do want to note that you all aren't going to hear a lot about this because it lives within the mayor's office, but we've dedicated one of the FTEs in the mayor's office to be a grant manager position. That's posted right now. So if any of you know anyone that would be interested in that position to help support departments like Rachel's, to support efforts like housing. And so that's on the website right now. It's active, it's open, we're looking for candidates. But we know that a lot of our departments, particularly like healthy communities, are really grant-based and applying for these things. And as someone who's filled out grant applications, it's a rigorous process.
And may I just follow up on that?
Of course.
Thank you so much. And you said that that is something that within the mayor's budget and his staff, you're
Accounted for,
that's
yeah.
great. Perfect.
Yeah, we reduced the amount of mayor's office staff and kind of reprioritized some of that funding. And so that position will report to our new chief of policy and resiliency.
Great. Any more questions? Councilmember Sherman?
You're acting when you're planning to job.
I have. Yes.
So. Okay.
Thank you. Is there anything else?
Yes. Councilor Harris.
I'm not speaking for the staff, I'm always here, so I know what goes on inside the council office. These calls are coming in really heavy into the council office, asking for where do we find houses or whatever. Do we lead them directly to you?
At this point, that's a good question.
Yeah,
We are
it's coming in every day almost.
So I will say that we have an intake form for reports of that I think is managed.
Asking for. Their request is for they need housing.
Their request for housing, sometimes it's a request for, someone who's struggling with,
Yeah. So
addiction, and it's all kind of things that we get. And it's like, where do we land this? I'm glad that, by the way, thank you so much. I'm glad to hear that department is being built in the city, because for some reason or the other, it's been brought back to us. I don't know whether it's because of state decision or whatever, but the city is definitely getting a lot of pressure around housing, around, people who are struggling. And so, does that line up with what you?
One thing I would say is I know that Sil on my office has worked with you on developing a resource sheet, right?
Yes.
For your work.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've worked on really refining who to direct people to call, because it's so confusing. People don't know who to call. And if they call city council or they call MCCS, frankly, we're not able to provide what they need. So we're going to be doing some outreach. We've had a lot of communication with United Way 211, and because they really are the most updated clearinghouse of all social services. So whatever we might print out is out of date as soon as it gets printed, but they have everything like really up to date. So what we're doing in those cases is encouraging people to either call United Way, to either dial 211, or you can go to the website. There's a self-referral form, which anybody could help. If somebody can't fill it out themselves, anyone can help put in what that person's needs are. And that immediately goes into a like a case management load. So that's one thing that we're asking people to please use a lot, because I think that that is frankly far more useful to the community than what any of us could immediately provide. And then in terms of, well, even if somebody was calling and saying, I need recovery services, you know, I think 211 is really the right way to go for that. I think if somebody, we get a lot of calls that are like, somebody's camping out in a park, somebody's sleeping on the sidewalk, that sort of thing. And for that, we actually do have an intake form so that we're tracking basically every day. What are the reports that are coming in and how can we make sure that we're sending out reports? So I think what we might do is actually just share that form with city council staff so they hear those.
Chris,
You can
yeah,
send it
Chris has
right
been in
back.
connection with us, and so
We'll work
if,
together.
if you need something, you can, it's all going through MCCS. So we're also starting an MCCS case so that we can data track it as we're going through the workflow. And, you know, Rachel sends out a provider, we send out EMS, we're just tracking what our actions are on those. And some of them have folks and some of them are vacant. It all depends on what we're hearing. And just to Rachel's point, that was another thing, like we didn't know where to direct people. And so the staff had this really great idea to create a who to call sheet. And so we just finished translating and designing that. It's a quick printout, but the mayor gets asked a lot, and I know staff get asked a lot, where do I send people? So outlining what 211 is for, what 911 is for, what 988 is for, what 311 is for. And so we really tried to spell that out in simple terms and translate that so that we can be handing that out so folks kind of know where to go.
Because we were getting so many requests like yours, but also from all parts of the community. Who do I call if I need help with XYZ?
Yeah.
And I had an interesting conversation with our comm staff that said nationwide after the pandemic, that is the state. Like people have lost those connections that they maybe had in 2019 about who is that helps with these things. And so I think we need a real push to kind of recreate that connection for people and help them understand where there are resources they can access and who to ask. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, please, please.
you mentioned, and which you absolutely are right about, a lot of people struggling after the pandemic with depression, you know, mental health, isolation still, whatever. Is that something your department is able to do, or are you just?
Yeah, interestingly, we one of our many grants that we got is we are participating in a nation. We're one of 9 cities across the country that is participating in an arts and health initiative that's about using art to build community and address social isolation. We are doing that right now, working in partnership with Art, Culture, Tourism, and PHA, and we're going to be working on public art projects at Carroll Tower and at Chad Brown. I'm hoping that will grow, but I think that that's a really, and then I think the activities that you engaged with Susie and our staff also are a piece of that work. Just giving an opportunity for people to talk about their mental state publicly and develop some skills. Unfortunately, we have a real shortage in clinical response, but there's a lot of support I think we can give to people for just giving people an opportunity to talk and process and reconnect that they've lost.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Thank you. That's great.
Yes, Councilor Randall.
One more quick question, building on what you guys were just discussing with that, the sheet you've developed for like when to call 311 versus, can you, it sounds like you can share that with Chris, can you share that with like this committee? Because
Oh, yeah, we launched that with Chris. We shared the intake form with Chris. I shared this all with you. It's done. We were just translated it today, so.
Oh, terrific, yeah, because I'd love to share that with my.
Yeah, I think it needs to be shared very broadly. We're trying to get it out.
We have the Hope Street Festival this weekend and people were like, what can we bring to tell who people call for what things? And this would be like,
Yeah.
let's print out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Counselor Sanchez.
The chairwoman, just a quick question, do a lot of people come in person to that office?
No, we're actually, we go out into the community a lot, but we're not actually a front-facing office in that sense. And yes, so I think that in some ways, that's a good thing because honestly, if people walk into our office to give them help, we wouldn't be able to, we don't provide direct services, so I don't want to give people the impression and then have it turned away that we can't offer them something. So no, it's not usually a walk-in opportunity. It's more of a connecting people out in the community, making them aware of resources available through partners.
Thank you.
Yes, Counselor Richardson.
This is more for the administration. In 444, everyone that's there is charged a rental. Can you just elaborate on this?
It's based on square footage, so each department, depending on how much square footage they occupy in the building, gets charged a prorated amount of the rent. And that calculation is done by public property. So I think the most recent one was done last year, so it's recent.
And what goes to, the money goes back to the general fund or,
No, so we rent the staff building.
excuse me?
That 444 is not owned by the city, so we pay rent at that for that.
Oh.
Yeah.
I thought it was actually owned.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
yeah, so the city solicitor actually mentioned yesterday, it might have been after the meeting or before, but we're in a long-term lease with that building. He stated that he took a look at that lease in the past couple of years and there's no way to get out of it.
That's the one that Dorley, the Dorley?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Would you know who owns it?
Mr. Palino Properties.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. I thought it was actually at one point that the city, since they put the name on it, owned it, okay.
All right, any other questions? Well, thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you so much. Thank you. And I'm our business on the business. I have a motion to mark, this is part of the presentation as exhibit number 22.
Yes.
All right. I have a second. Councilor Anderson, seconded by Councilor Picardo, all in favor? Aye. All in favor. Thank you. Okay, now we're moving on to.
Department of Equity and Political.
Excuse me, I'm just having a moment. I was wondering why we hadn't heard from Sue. Who is here. I wanted to thank you very much and didn't realize you were looking at the department. Yes. So thank you so much for your service. You've done a wonderful job for the city. All right, now we go.
Okay, next up, we have Department of Equity, Inclusion and Belonging. This department is not a revenue generating department. Total salaries in fiscal 24 are proposed at $181,935. This represents a decrease of $62,234 from the 23 budget. The department has proposed the following organizational changes. We fund the deputy director of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion and Belonging at a savings of $100,728. Defund the confidential assistance to the lead director, the savings of $55,767,000, and fund a project manager for $60,861. And this generates a savings of $95,633. The decrease is offset by the local 1033 2.75 cost of living adjustment and step increases. And the attrition allocation change that was made by the finance department. I'm moving on to benefits. Total benefits for fiscal 24 are proposed at $105,028. This is a decrease of $15,300 from the 23 budget. Total services for fiscal year twenty-four are proposed at $38,208, a decrease of $8,022 from the 23 budget. This decrease is due to greater than anticipated community support, which has reduced the operating costs in this budget. Supplies in fiscal 24 are proposed at $1,200, which is consistent with the 23 budget. There's no capital budget for this department. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the director to talk about this department.
Welcome, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I think everyone here is familiar with the fact that Deeb is the baby in the room. It is a new department, started in January of last year. There was a deputy director that started a little bit earlier than that. When we came on board, we were tasked with basically three components. So I'll talk about those three levels. One is to think about a citywide diversity, equity, and inclusion vision that is going to be in the long term. To think about ourselves as internal consultants to the departments in the city, and then to also be outward facing and develop partnerships with our community members. So over the course of last year, we did a lot of mapping of where diversity, equity, and inclusion work was happening. We were engaging with the directors and the different departments to even talk about what is this thing called diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it was a response to a community upheaval that brought this topic to the city. D&I has been around for quite some time, but DEI is something that came up really around the 2020s. We were pretty comfortable with diversity and inclusion. The equity component and belonging and justice is something that's a little bit newer. So internally, we've been working with a series of departments, really targeting the bigger departments because we are a small department, so we couldn't go out there trying to service 2,000 people. So we started working with the police as one of the very first departments, the fire, Providence water, workforce development, the rec centers, parks, DPW, so on and so forth. And we have really strong relationships across the board. I think several of you are really familiar with the work. One, with the police, we were able to revamp the diversity sensitivity training curriculum. We worked very closely with, at the time, Major Perez, who's now the chief, so that work has moved along relatively quickly. We have worked with Providence Water, where we developed a DEI working group. Representatives of all the different divisions partake in this conversation. We've been able to give workshops and work towards perhaps establishing a deeper understanding of what equity is in that particular space. Working with parts who were rethinking signage. If you were working with signage on one side of the town where you have predominantly Spanish speakers versus the other side where you have Vietnamese, what does that mean in terms of communication? So bridging communication, language in particular, rose to the top very quickly when we were doing our listening sessions, our roundtables, talking to counselors, talking to directors, talking to community organizers. More than race, they felt like a lot of the organizations are now taking up the mantle around racial equity and environmental justice, probably because of the happenings of 2020, but the area that continued to be a relative gap was around bridging communication and giving a sense of belonging, especially around language. So that's some of the internal work that we were doing. We established a DEI collaborative very quickly, identifying nonprofit organizations that had a physical space for providing services to our residents. So for example, Oasis International on Broad Street, Center for Southeast Asia, the Nonviolence Institute, Southside Cultural Center, the Jewish Community Center, so on and so forth. And the idea there was to do the same kind of work because 2020 in particular pushed everyone into silos. So they were very unfamiliar with the services that were being provided across the city and for whom. And there's also a lot of misconceptions in the community that if you are a Center for Southeast Asians, they're only interested in serving Southeast Asians. So we're doing a little bit of that organization and education as well. We're also trying to engage with the five sort of main sectors that emerged in the work, which is the K-12, higher education, corporate, nonprofit, and other government entities. That includes having partners at the state level to bridge this communication, like the Division of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion with Thomas Avila, and having conversations with him about how do we now start to spread this throughout Rhode Island. We have a very tight relationship now with the chief of equity belonging in Pawtucket, who started relatively recent, Chachi Carvalho. And I'm together coming to the table to start thinking about a broader plan on how we can actually influence and support each other's work. Also in the community, we have these ambassador programs. I'm sure you're familiar with AAAG, the African American Ambassadors. And last year, our department was very much in a supportive role for the reparations work. Myself and Keith Stokes were responsible for writing the report on behalf of the commission to make sure that their wishes were being well represented, and all of the in-between works there, and that was a pretty massive undertaking. In addition to the African American ambassadors, we had a growing number of ambassadors expressing interest. So we already had the Latino ambassadors. We had the Cape Verdean ambassadors. This guy by the name of Silas Pinto started in 2020, now run by Susan Pires. And also we started hearing from others saying, well, if they have ambassadors, we would like to start ambassadors. So we have an indigenous merging group. We have the Center for Southeast Asians interested in that. The youth groups are interested in that, and we've been working very closely with Dr. Onyé from PPSD because she serves in the same, very similar capacity. So that's another big component that we've been able to support. And in terms of the working towards a citywide strategic vision, we held a lot of meetings. I literally can't count right now how many meetings we had, listening tours, roundtables, and I'm happy to say that most of our budget was like absolutely untouched because our community partners came to the table and supported and paid and held sessions, paid for all of the food and the speakers so that we can just show up and do our work together. So in the end, we designed a DEI engagement report instead of a strategic plan because we thought it really important to go back to the community and say, hey, we talked for the last 8 months or so. Does this reflect what you have been telling us in the areas of priorities? And it was a really fantastic event, and it really set in motion now what we're going to be doing for the remainder of this year. We also engaged with a steering committee that was composed of internal folks as well as people in the community that were nominated. And that group helped make sure that our ship was moving in sort of the right direction, if you will. And then beyond that, we have some programs that we had been developing and promoting, some of them just building a foundation since we were a new department. But we have DEED TIPS, which is training internal Providence staff. And then there's a counterpart for the community called KITS, which is highlighting the 4 pillars of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's knowledge of historical context and cultural sensitivity, interpersonal communication, mediation, and facilitation, tools for methods and research, and systems and organizational change. And there are a few others like POPAC, which is City of Providence Ambassadors Coalition, to try to bring our ambassadors together. In fact, that is the very structure that we're using to transition AAAG into our department as the department that can support them in the next phases. We also have a few others that are in the works, like Relay, which is Redefining Equity Leadership Academy for Youth. That's going to be coming up with the works of Jawan Wilson and with Napoleon Reed. So that's basically where we have been, the 3 different levels, and then thinking about how to design and pilot some of the programs so that when it's ready for full rollout, our project manager, which is why we're making that particular request, is going to be critical in making sure that it's timely, it is connected, it's integrated, and that we can trim out redundancies in any of the other areas that we have throughout the city. So that person will be working, of course, in the department, but keeping an eye on the other works that are happening in our sibling departments that are also focused on issues of equity and belonging, but making sure that our efforts are as coordinated as possible.
Wow. Very impressive. I just wanted, so how have you been doing this? So you're losing a deputy director, and then you're and a confidential assistant for I'm just wondering how you can do all the work you do with you, and no one else.
I appreciate that. We unfortunately haven't been able to have a person in the assistant position. We've had 2 unsuccessful searches and we're actually in the 3rd now. For very different reasons. One in the middle of a lot of transitions, and the second one, the person that we actually offered, it was gonna start on March 16th, pulled out because he received an offer that was better aligned with his education. By the time we went to the others, they had already moved on. So that was an unfortunate piece. So we haven't had someone in that position. And my deputy director was on medical leave for about 6 to 7 months. So it sort of forced me to do a lot of this work in foundation alone. But at the same time, this last year was really a pilot to see where this department can place itself, how it can build the internal relationships and networks, and also external partnerships. And this upcoming year will become another pilot year. And having 2 of us doing this work seems to us like it would be manageable, so that we can think about how do we collect data, how do we demonstrate that we have actually placed ourselves in this bigger web of the work. So in that mapping, we can tell you that the Human Relations Commission, for example, there's a lot of overlapping work that we're still going to be able to do. I was working with Andy Willard as a consultant, making sure that some of those events like the Day for Racial Healing was happening. We supported them in that. So there are some components already in the city that we just have to learn how to better leverage, and then revisit the conversation of how many more people we might need.
Okay, and is the project manager posted, that job posted?
Yes, we're actually in the search right now, and this project coordinator person will sort of transition into the project manager in the new year because we're right at this term. So we are hiring this person with that in mind.
Okay, questions? Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Doctor. My first question, what's your reception like when you go to departments to introduce or like what's that process like? I mean.
So you can imagine in the beginning, folks were just a little confused about what exactly is this? No one told us that this was coming really. And so it took a lot of just zooming out, bringing the helicopter up here and just kind of giving them a broader sense of that work and what our department is going to be able to do to thread what's already in existence. Some of the departments were nervous that we were going to come in and start pointing at our faces and saying, you're doing this wrong, and you know, this department is full of discrepancies and discrimination. And that's not what happened. We approached it from a true DEI lens, which is about compassion, and it's about asset-based resource mapping. Not going there looking for problems, but going in there looking for things that are already happening so that we can elevate those and better leverage in the work. So the reception in the beginning was one-off. Can you explain what this is all about? And I would say by the 3rd month, folks already had a really good sense of what we were trying to do because we connected with all the departments and we were involved in some of the reparations work and connected with the community, and we put ourselves out there very early. Providence Water was a little bit, more challenging because it's a different kind of structure at first, but the general manager, Ricky, was able to work with the chair of the board, brought us into that process, and within the first couple of meetings, was able to pull together the working group. So I would say in general, the reception has been very positive. The police is another great example. I went to the colonel, he connected me with Major Perez at the time, and that work has moved forward. We have very deep work with Lieutenant Fallon, who's in charge of the police academy, very open to the conversations. We completely revamped and proposed the new curriculum within like 2 months. And then the rest of the time was really thinking about preparing for the recruits that started in March. So I think overall really well, and folks are starting to understand what this particular kind of work is and where it belongs in the city after 386 years. So there's still some work to be done there, but I think for the most part, people are getting the gist of what we're looking for. And this upcoming year is going to be land in the helicopter in the different departments and really start helping the departments understand how they can thread this idea of equity inclusion into their work.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. My next question is, do you plan on replicating what you're doing with, Providence Water to other departments or?
Now, that's a great question. We recently presented to the board where we are. And again, this is the furthest we've gotten at this point with a large department like that. The police department is also has gotten, I would say, like a really good foundation on this, but it's very different structure. Our goal is to then have a conversation with the directors and chiefs of those departments and then try to compare and contrast. Where else do you think we can see this? Does it make sense to have whatever structure we design in Providence Water, in DPW, for example, or in parks, et cetera? So we're very early in the stage to really know how we can replicate it in different places. I think the most important part is going to be to try to customize first based on what they're saying they need. That's part of that resource mapping. And then as I am the consistent person showing up in the spaces, the constant, I'd be able to say, you know, actually, we tried this in water, it worked really well. Let's think about having a working group. And then from there, think about whether or not we need a division and kind of go from there. And they've been very willing to be thought partners in that process. So I don't know if we're ready to do any replications, but definitely bringing in some ideas around what has worked so far.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, what's your work, experience, with parks?
With Parks was one of the first that reached out to us about the bridging language component. So I won't go into a huge spiel right now and bore people because it's already too late in the day. But you know, the works of like but those works of like linguistics and philology, and I've talked a lot with Ms. Harris this. That a lot of our departments need to be thinking very critically about how to leverage English to bridge to other languages, right? So we have 72 languages represented of the 350 spoken in the United States, 72 languages here in Providence, and 94% of our languages are related, which is a great opportunity for us to be thinking about when I'm writing to certain communities or I'm putting up a sign or I am relabeling a certain street or I'm just sending out some flyers. How do I write it so that the audience that I have in mind is going to understand it? Or I'm going to sort of elevate the probability that they will see what this is all about. So we talked a lot about philology, which is learning about languages through relationships. The United States has this huge flaw called teaching other languages through linguistics, which is the best way to teach people how to never learn another language. So I can go into any space and say, well, if you were born into an English-only household, there's a 95% chance you never developed fluency in any other language. But it's a two-way street, which means that if you come to the United States, you're also going to struggle to learn English because they teach it through linguistics. So Park is really interested in that kind of work, to think about their signage, to think about if I'm going to put rules and guidelines for usage of the park in an area that's predominantly Latin-based speakers, that it would look very different than on the other side of town where you might have predominantly people from Southeast Asia that are speaking monolingual, monosyllable languages, but completely disconnected at the vocabulary level. So they're really interested in that work. We've been doing it intermittently throughout. There have been certain pauses because of major projects, but we're definitely going to continue in that.
Yes, please.
Is there anything in place for new city employees or staff that might be coming from a different type of community outside of Providence? I know on our public safety, police and fire, we have a lot of folks from West Greenwich, from North Kingston. Is there anything that we're doing?
You speaking of the transfers?
No, I'm talking about from city employees that don't live in Providence or another urban core community. Is there anything that we're doing as a city to either educate them or have them do a training around cultural awareness, race awareness?
That is something that we started the conversation with Emmanuel, who was the chief at the time. And then that sort of stopped in the last 4 to 5 months. Also, keeping in mind that throughout the summer, a lot of the work that the deed department was doing got redirected to the reparation supports. So some of that got paused. And we are now with a new chief of human resources, and we're going to be re-engaging around that. We actually have a meeting for next Thursday to start this conversation about onboarding and also this transfer. For the police, I was asking specifically about that because I received a call from Lieutenant Fallon on this very topic, saying we have 4 people who are transferring. We would love for them to meet with your department and have this conversation, both in terms of the cultural sensitivity and understanding where they're coming from and where they're coming to, and to also make sure that we put in place some mechanisms to support them during their transition. So that's definitely very much in our forefront. And I think our chief of human resources is going to be a great partner in that.
Thank you.
Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, for everything, that you do for this presentation. I guess building off what Chair Anthony was asking at the beginning, given the breadth of things you just described that you're doing, why defund the deputy director role? Why not also keep that in addition to adding the project manager?
For the deputy director role in particular, I will definitely just ask you to maybe touch base with human resources itself, because there are some other dimensions of that. Yeah, there's more dimensions to that.
Just doesn't seem like enough people, like this is so important is what I'm trying to say. The other question I have is about the advisory panel. It says that the board will meet, 2 to 4 times a year. Who's in the advisory panel and like, what is their role with you?
So right now, that's the steering committee. We're transitioning into more of an advisory role. So we have from the community, April Brown, Arlene Fonseca, Lucy Rose Correa, who works for Children's Friend. April Brown is very involved in the environmental justice piece. So these are folks that were recommended by our different ambassadors to be part of this initial group. The other folks were internal, like Andy Willer, at the time, Andrew Benoit was part of that, Lawan Allen, etc. As we now have a better sense of what we're trying to do with that engagement report, we can now start transitioning into a fully advisory board that's composed of folks from the community. So that is actually on our website. People are going to start applying, and then we review and bring our committee together to make some selections. But it's more of it will be more of a committee than just a plain advisory board. They will have information about any of the programs that we're doing. They'll ask for numbers about how things are going. They can redirect us in whatever way they think is most appropriate. So that will be the power that they have, so that we have a direct link to our external partners.
Excellent. Yes, not a question, but a comment. In the week since we met, I've talked with a whole bunch of folks, and organically, so many people now have just been bringing you up, like, oh, if you talk with, like everybody, you have so many fans in the environmental justice community in all sorts. I'm not going to tell you, but it's just been coming up. So it's like I feel like in the week since we met, just so you know, there's so many people who are really huge fans of your work and have been bringing it up without me having to bring you up. So thank you for all you're doing. It's definitely being noticed, and I want you to know people are talking about you in the room, not in.
Yes, Councilor Furtado.
So likewise, thank you for your passion and since I've met you and coming into the space, it has really shown in the community. My question is in reference to reaching out to the workforce development, right? In particular when it comes to the construction area and so forth. What if you've gone to those departments? So at least that section, and then 2, working with the state, right? You mentioned Tomas Avila. There are opportunities where the state is actually providing any other funds to expand this kind of work. Once what you described, what you're doing is reducing all these complaints that potentially will coming and going into, let's say, human resource, and we're not doing that at the ground level, but mostly at the state level for any complaints and so forth. So is there Have there been any talks about that?
I'll start with the workforce solutions. Yes, we have met. I've met with that staff 3 or 4 times, and the idea, same thing. They want to be external facing, they want to support a lot of the folks that come in, usually English as a second or third language, and we're working around how do they better equip themselves with the folks who are predominantly English only speakers to still be able to bridge the communication more effectively. So we've been working together over the course of the year. In terms of that, the state level, one of the first things that I asked Director Avila was, where's the money? How can we bring some of that in this direction? Because we were struggling to find grants that would allow municipal government to put their hands on it. Like some of it's getting to the state level and just kind of dying there. We reached out to Rhode Island Foundation, to the Bar Foundation. We actually got a small grant, $30,000 in collaboration with sustainability to continue doing some of that unpacking racism and race equity work. DEEB, of course, is a little bit broader than just race. We're looking at issues around sexuality and religion and class and so on and so forth. So we're trying to be mindful as to not just be pigeonholed in that work. And the conversations with Thomas Avila has gone really well. We're trying to create a similar DEI collaborative that we have at the city level now at the state level. And Shashi just stepped into his role literally a couple of months ago. So that's going to be a big push because there are going to be different cities turning to the state and say, okay, now we have people in these municipal offices. What are you doing to support us? Because up to this point, there hasn't really been much of a, what do you need municipal government from us? So we're trying to push in that direction to say that that really needs to start happening, because for the longest time, it's been up there, but it hasn't been at the city government. So I think they just, we need to wake them up to the fact that we're now around and we need to be part of that conversation and be at the same table. But he's been very receptive to meeting. We've met with RAMP, which is with Tina Patterson, and looking at accessibilities and trying to broaden some of the idea. The last meeting, we pitched IDEA, which is inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. To start having conversation and weave the piece around abilities in a much more intentional way.
Yes, Councilor Harris.
The reason I feel I have to say this because you asked the question about how did you find the time to do all of this. I actually had a meeting with the doctor because of all the trauma and the stuff that's going on in my neighborhood around the social crisis and, you know, all kind of other things. I actually had a meeting. I don't think you can say no, because I needed to have a great facilitator that talks about diversity and inclusion. The healthy communities have been very supportive. And I think a lot of that have been a little bit less, you know, traumatizing to people when we have great facilitators. We have people who step in and say, I understand what you're talking about. That's where the healthy communities got involved with my neighborhood, is because people couldn't they see people that's going through so many crises and they didn't know who to call. It traumatizes me. So I know when people call, it is what it is. A lot of it has to do with folks also saying, well, there's no equity here. There's nobody who care about our voices. So I felt like he was a great match, but you know, now I'm feeling guilty because I was find him a person. I asked for the help and he's like, absolutely. I mean, it's same with the healthy community, and I understand that, you know, the job is really tough, you know, to be able to do that, all of that he's doing, amazing work that he's doing, and being able to bring people together, even from the state. So, yeah, I just wanted to answer your question. You just can't say no. I think it is.
Thank you.
But that's a good thing.
Right.
Yeah.
For us, it is.
Yeah, for us, it is, right?
All right.
And thank you for what you do, and thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me.
Certainly. Councilor Sanchez.
Thank you. Last question. I'm nervous for the answer. I'm gonna ask about
That back up? I'm backing up.
up to this point, May 17th, 2023, what has been your involvement with the city's comp fair?
The comprehensive
Yeah.
economic plan.
Correct.
So I've met with Cassandra Thomas a couple of times. As soon as she hit the ground running, she reached out to our office and talked about this language piece. The area where we'll be able to really support is making sure that the comp plan is digestible by everyone. And I say that with caution, because sometimes we're thinking we need to quote unquote dumb down the language for people to understand, and that's not what we're talking about. This piece around philology is understanding who your readers are. And of course, that's very complex because we have 72 languages represented, and we'll never be able to get a comprehensive plan translated in those 72 languages. I think 30 of which are not even written languages. So we are actively involved in that. I'm in the team that started thinking about the communication plan. So we're going to be much more involved, and she also has me in touch with her planning team. So again, this is part of that internal consultant component of our department. So we're definitely involved there.
Thank you. Good to hear.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your excellent work. I think we've all really appreciated the impact you've had on our city, and we know there's more to come. So thank you very much for your service.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, discussion? Oh, good, we must mark this, the budget presentation as exhibit number 23. We have a motion. Second, very motion made by Councilor Carter, and by Councilor Annabelle, all in favor, all opposed. Then I need a motion to continue. So, all right, the motion to continue was made by Councilor Anderson, second by Councilor Sanchez, all in favor? All opposed? Now we have a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Councilor Charter, seconded by Councilor Sanchez, all in favor? All opposed? Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
On next week.
Yeah.
We know if we're doing, there's an ordinance committee.
Tuesday was up on the fifth.
Committee.